Well, the government calls them some of the most dangerous people on the planet, and since President Obama has now promised to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay next year, the question is, what should the government do with hundreds of suspected terrorists being held there? Well, if certain lawmakers have their way, many of the suspected terrorists could end up at the Thomson Correctional Facility that's in northwestern Illinois. With us now from Capitol Hill, Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, who has been pushing for the plan, reportedly calling it a dream come true. I think those were your words. Senator Durbin, pleasure to see you. You have argued that the federal takeover of the prison will create as many as 3,000 jobs, including new businesses created. Are you certain of those numbers, and who performed the analysis for you?
The Council of Economic Advisors has told us that between 1,800 jobs in the prison itself, the military side and the Bureau of Prisons, and another 1,200 to 1,400 jobs supporting that prison will be created. Over $200 million in economic activity each year, up to $1 billion over a 4-year period of time.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, many of the critics of this plan have never been to Carroll County. They've never seen these rural areas and the problems they're going through. These jobs would dramatically change the economy of the area, dramatically reducing unemployment.
And Senator, we're going to talk in a moment with Congressman Mark Kirk. He issued, though, a press release accusing you of misleading the people of Illinois about jobs and preying on their economic uncertainty. We'll put on the screen part of what he wrote. The Bureau of Prisons yesterday informed Congressman Don Manzullo that the plan to move Gitmo to Thomson would create only 450 to 500 jobs with no hiring preference given to local area residents and no hires over the age of 37. Is that true, sir?
In fact, it's not true. The situation is Congressman Kirk has made assertions about visitations of the Guantanamo detainees clearly wrong. He did not read the law. They are not allowed visitors. This notion of jihadist followers coming through O'Hare and trekking across Illinois into the camp, it isn't allowed at Guantanamo. It wouldn't be allowed here. He was wrong on that. Here's what it gets down to. For the Guantanamo detainees, there will be military personnel brought in who will definitely run the military portion of the prison, about 25% of it. For the Bureau of Prisons part of it, there will people will be hired from the community. The only preference is not to local residents, but to veterans. That's the preference under the law, and I hope Congressman Kirk supports that. I do. I think veterans deserve a preference. But the fact is, up to 500 local jobs, maybe more, at the prison, and literally over 1,000 outside the prison. Think of all the realtors selling homes. Think of the people selling cars, appliances, groceries, shops. All of this is economic activity, which unfortunately the critics are dismissing.
You've argued that Gitmo needs to be closed in part because it's used as jihadist propaganda and recruiting tool. Well, won't the Illinois prison do the same thing, maybe more so, because it's going to be located directly on American soil?
Let me just tell you point blank, we have al-Qaeda-involved terrorists currently in prison in Illinois, and no one pays any attention to them. They're not a fear factor, as we've heard from Congressman Kirk and others. One is currently being held at Marion, Illinois, and no one has even noticed. The fact that gives these prisoners notoriety is the fact that they're at Guantanamo in Cuba. That's not just my position alone that it should be closed. President George Bush 8 different times said he wanted to close Guantanamo. General Colin Powell said if he could close it, it wouldn't be tomorrow, it'd be this afternoon.
Yeah.
Right, Robert Gates, the Secretary of Defense, General David Petraeus, all have called for the closure of Guantanamo. Those who think they have more intelligence material than the Secretary of Defense ought to explain how they came across this material, that they know better than these people.
All right, I'm going to talk again to Mark Kirk in just a moment, and he said, look, this is 150 miles from Chicago, it's the third largest city, tallest tower in the United States. And I guess I would pick up on that and say, well, why take the risk when you can place this in Montana, which is not close to any major city? What would you say to that?
Let me tell you, this is a remote area 150 miles away from the city of Chicago. To argue, and I'm disappointed that some of the critics are starting to name terrorist targets that they ought to consider in the city of Chicago. I think that's irresponsible. What I think we ought to get down to is the reality here. We have not had a single escape from a Supermax facility.
Right.
None of these detainees will have any visitors, the jihad followers that Congressman Kirk has been talking about. We have not had an attack on any prison, though we hold over 340 terrorists currently in our prisons across America and 35 in Illinois.
Okay.
And I also want to get down to this bottom line. If we are fearful of convicting, prosecuting, and incarcerating terrorists that they might retaliate, where does that leave us as a nation?
Right. Senator,
I think they're channeling Neville Chamberlain here.
I got to go. Senator Dick Durbin, thanks very much. Now, the other side, an opponent responding. With us from Capitol Hill, Illinois Republican Congressman Mark Kirk. Congressman Kirk running for President Obama's old U.S. Senate seat. Congressman, thanks for being with us. You have said that the Chicago area would become a terrorist target if Gitmo detainees were moved to a prison about 150 miles away. In truth, sir, isn't every major American city a potential target, including the one I'm sitting in right here in New York City? Why should Chicago become exempt?
Well, Chicago has already been the subject of al-Qaeda attention. I'm a veteran. I served in Afghanistan. Our forces already came across work by al-Qaeda against the Sears Tower and O'Hare Airport. But now, under this proposal, we would have 4 times the number of terrorists of any other location in the United States. And that would mean that we would receive quite a lot of jihadist attention in that part of the world.
But look, some might say you're lacking fortitude, and again, they've written that. And I have to bring up New York again. It has in the past, will in the future, house al-Qaeda terrorists, and we may have to absorb the risk and, yes, face the horror of murder, as we did certainly on 9/11. But you seem to be saying, hey, in Illinois, we don't want to face the danger that democracy sometimes demands. Do you really mean it that way?
No, I think we should follow the legal precedents set by President Lincoln and President Roosevelt to hold these people overseas and try them by military commission. I don't think that we should bring the al-Qaeda terrorists to New York either. I agree with the governor of New York, Governor Patterson, a Democrat, who says that they should not accept this risk either.
But the decision's already been made. It's a fait accompli.
Well, this decision in Illinois is subject to a vote by the Illinois General Assembly and State Senate. And quite frankly, I think it's a decision bigger than any one senator. I would hope that we would have a referendum of the voters of Illinois and let them decide.
Well, I was referring to the 5 being sent to New York for trial in federal civilian courts. A columnist for the Chicago Tribune seems to be referring to you when he wrote the following. We'll put it up on the screen. Let me get this right. We have asked hundreds of thousands of men and women in our military to risk their lives fighting our enemies in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we're too scared to accept the minuscule danger posed by a few dozen suspected terrorists who would be locked up in a supermax prison. That's Stephen Chapman, a Chicago Tribune columnist. Your reaction?
Well, I was one of those veterans that served overseas, and the real question is this a necessary risk that we should accept? We have a state-of-the-art $54 million Guantanamo Bay facility already paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. Should we instead create a Great Lakes Gitmo and bring them to America's heartland? I would say that this risk is unnecessary. I also think we should learn from the lessons of New York. The murderers of Rabbi Kahan all visited that facility in Attica prison, and then they became the core of the first team that bombed the World Trade Center.
Congressman, with all due respect, isn't this sort of classic NIMBY, not in my backyard?
Well, I would hope that this would not be in any continental U.S. backyard. That's why we should keep the Guantanamo Bay facility open.
But so again, that's a fait accompli. The president made the decision. He signed the order. It may not happen within the year period, January 22nd, but it's going to happen. And they're going to end up somewhere, and likely in the United States.
I would say it's not a fait accompli. You forget that the Senate has already voted 94 votes to not permit al-Qaeda terrorists in the United States. And the Democratic leadership of the House just sunk the Justice Department appropriations bill because they knew the House of Representatives would vote the same way. You
know, the town of Thomson seems to be willing to take their chances with these suspected terrorists in their backyard. The village president's in favor. Most of the residents seem to be. They want the jobs. They want the boost to the economy. What do you say to them?
Well, the economic benefit is limited at best, and also there are many unanswered questions. First of all, this facility is only 22 miles from the nearest nuclear facility. Secondly, we've seen no analysis of how we would protect judges and jurors and their family from retaliation. Third, of the 3,000 jobs promised, 2,000 of them are active duty military. And the Bureau of Prisons, in their formal briefing to Congressman Manzullo, said, we're only going to hire about 500 people.
And I quoted that.
No one over... Right.
A moment ago with the senator. Congressman, I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm up against a hard break. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Fair and balanced debate.